This evening we're going to discuss the concept of Schar Shabbos. Schar Shabbos is essentially the prohibition of essentially the question that we're going to discuss exactly what is the definition of it. But right now, what we understand Schar Shabbos is essentially earning money on Shabbos. We'll see as we develop this idea as to what is actually the issue. Is the issue to earn money on Shabbos, or is it more related to the fact that there may be some malacha involved? And where this becomes important is, of course, when there is no malacha involved. So if there is no malacha, so let's discuss what we're going to be sort of looking at from an overview. So for example, a person wants to engage a babysitter for the use of Shabbos. Supposedly, we'll see at least at first glance, there is no malacha involved. So we're talking about someone hires a babysitter, a Jewish babysitter, for Shabbos purposes, right? This is an arrangement that is made, by the way, before Shabbos, but it is basically for the engagement of a babysitter on Shabbos. You work as a waiter in a camp, and you are working in that kind of an environment. We have youth group people that work here in the shul, and they are getting paid specifically for their work on Shabbos. When you broaden it, you're getting into issues of, you have people that are going to be rabbis, bali kriya, right? For example, we pay people for their services to lane on Shabbos, and at first glance they are working and they're getting paid for their Shabbos work. And the list that goes on and on and on in terms of what kinds of work is involved. And then it sort of comes to the issues of, for example, which we'll touch upon later on, hiring a bal tefillah for Shabbos. If a physician works on Shabbos, if a physician is called, can he charge for these Shabbos, these duties? So this is basically the concept. Does it make a difference if the person is Jewish or non-Jewish? For example, hiring a waiter on Shabbos, is that an issue, right? So is this a problem for the both? Must it be for both people involved? In other words, will it be for the person who hires the person and the person who will call the mekabel, or is it only for the person who is a mekabel, or is it maybe not? Maybe it's only for, so those are the kinds of broader issues that we will sort of deal with. But so the overview of what I'd like to do is as follows. First of all, we'd like to go through understanding the source of this halacha, understand the nuance of what is the isser exactly involved. Then what we'll try to do is develop 4 different approaches to heterim that can be taken, and then basically you'll plug this back into at the end of the day, which will be to whatever the scenarios that we provided as examples. So there will be whether a babysitter and a bal koreh are going to be the same in terms of their potential for heter or not. We'll see how that works out as well. So let's take this to the first source. You have the source in front of you. So the Mishnah tells us as follows. The Mishnah is in Ksubas. Ksubas daf samach gimel amid aleph, and the Mishnah says as follows: Hamoredes al bala patchin lo miksubasa shiva dinarim b'Shabbos. A moredes al bala. So we have to first define some terms. What does it mean, a moredes al bala? So a moredes is someone who rebels. What does it mean? She rebels against her husband. So the Rishonim have a machloikes as to what exactly this means. It means that number one, she refrains and she withdraws, withholds from the man essentially marital relations, or there are specific prescribed tasks that women have, and she basically says, I'm not doing them. So whichever approach we take, that the details for our discussion is not very relevant, but those are the 2 definitions that are given for the moredes. So what do we say? So it means that what happens is that for this type of act of moredes, we withhold from her 7 dinarim. In other words, 1 dinar for every single day for the amount that this continues, this behavior continues. Now, lest we think that this is only a one-way street, what about if it's in reverse? So we add to her now. So what happens is she essentially gains, and by the fact that her ksuba now becomes more valuable, by how much? By a half a dinar a day, for a total of 6 dinarim for the week. Now, the Gemara discusses this, so that's going to be on Samach Daled Amud Aleph. So the Gemara says as follows: Amar le Reb Chiya bar Yosef l'Shmuel, Ma'ishna ihu di havne le de Shabbos, You should have already asked the question. There seems to be two problems or two asymmetries. Asymmetry number one is, why is there a difference between 7 and 6? Why is it that when she is the moredes, we say that for her, when she is the moredes, what happens is we minimize her ksuba by 7 dinarim, 1 dinar for every single day of the week. And for him, we only reduce it by a dinar. So that's question number one. But that we won't deal with right now. Our interest is the other one, which is, why is it that we go with 7 days for the woman, and we only go for 6 days for the man? That's the Gemara's question. So the Gemara's question is, Maishno, what is the difference? Ihu, from him, the Yahavnina de Shabbos, that basically for him, we count the Shabbos. Umaishna ihi, and why is it by her? De lo Yahavnina de Shabbos. Because you see that when it comes to her punishment, what happens is that when we punish her, we include the Shabbos. When it comes to him, we would say no. So the Gemara answers as follows. Ihi demi pachas kopachis, by her, when we are minimizing the value of our ksuba, loy mechzek ischar Shabbos. We don't see that as a diminishment. That diminishment is not seen as a schar Shabbos. However, ihu de usife komosfe. However, for him, where there is going to be a material gain, that what happens is that we increase, for example, the value of the ksuba. Mechzek is schar Shabbos. So when you add something, then it appears that there is a schar Shabbos. But to diminish it, that is not a schar Shabbos. So the Gemara explains the asymmetry in the punishment in very simple terms. And the Gemara says it's just a matter of what it reflects. Now, what this points out is, if you read the words of the Gemara carefully, the Gemara says mechzek is schar Shabbos, which means it appears to be like it's a schar Shabbos. So from here we're going to see a machlokis in the Rishonim and the Poskim as to what exactly is the gezerah that we are dealing with, and what is the isser. So Rashi's approach to this is as follows. If you see the Rashi, he says K'schar Shabbos, he says gezerah mishum mekach umemkar uschirus. This is a gezerah of mekach umemkar. So let's back up a little bit. What is mekach umemkar? Mekach umemkar is the prohibition to do business on Shabbos. Why is there a gezerah to do business on Shabbos? So the Gemara, the Rabbanan were worried about what? That ultimately you would come to writing. That's called mekach umemkar. So Rashi sees this as schar Shabbos. If you're going to start to pay people, then what's going to happen is you're going to have a schar Shabbos problem. Rashi seems to be saying that the problem is over here of a gezerah of mishum mekach umemkar. Comes the Beis Yosef and he asks the following question. He says, "L'chor, we have a question. What are we saying here? Let's read it inside together. He says here, Deho mekach umemkar gufe lo mistater elo midrabanan." He says, hold on a minute. Let's stop and pause for a moment. What, this mekach umemkar, we said, let's go back. Mekach umemkar is a prohibition to do business because you're not allowed to what? You're not allowed to write. The isser is that you're going to write. In other words, if you could somehow do business without writing, we wouldn't necessarily come to be worried about it. But the problem is it's mekach umemkar because you might come to write. Now what are we worried about? In our case here, we're saying what we want you to do. We don't want to transfer any sort of money. We don't want to transfer any sort of business thing because that's going to look like zera mishuma. It's going to look like mekach umemkar. And what's mekach umemkar? Only a worry about the concern is going to be of ksiva. Ask the Beis Yosef the question as follows. He says, where we go there, that we're going to add to mekach umemkar, havele gezerah legezerah. Hold on a second. The Beis Yosef says this is a gezerah on top of a gezerah. There is a principle that the Chachamim always said that you're not allowed to do X because of Y. But they never said you're not allowed to do X and then another X because of Y. That's a gezerah on top of a gezerah. So here what do we say? We're going to do this whole business with the mored and the moredes. Why? Because it's like mekach umemkar, but mekach umemkar is going to be a protection against kesiva. That seems to be far like a double reason. And there's nothing in the first activity that is going to get you to the isser that we're trying to worry about kesiva. So the Beis Yosef's approach to this schar Shabbos is very different than Rashi. And he says, Elovadai les be isura klal, afilu midrabanon. In other words, when it comes to schar Shabbos, there is no isser. I'll repeat that. There is no Isser of Schar Shabbos as far as the Beis Yosef sees it, right? Afilu midrabanan. Elo de latakin lahosib lechatchila larotzu chamim, right? Why? Mishum dehavi mechzei leinshi kischar Shabbos. It doesn't have the right flavor. It doesn't look right. It's a mechzei ki-inshi. So there's a difference in that kind of a halacha. So at this point, it's worthwhile just pointing out what are the different kind of isurim that we have in general for Shabbos. So everybody's familiar with the differences between, for example, a deraisa and a derabanan. So that's easy. So let's say, for example, we take the example of ksiva. You would be writing. If you do ksiva with a shinui, then that's called a derabanan. Now, what is a gezerah? So we say, for example, you're not allowed to play a musical instrument on Shabbos. Why are you not allowed to play a musical instrument on Shabbos? Because Shemo Yitakin Kli, you're going to do that. Now, how is that? What kind of a gezerah is that? That is a different level, right? So we have basically a deraisa, we have a derabanan, and then we have another level which is called a gezerah. So the way we're learning this is that the Isser, according to Rashi, is that it's a gezerah which falls into the category of mekach u'memkar. We see from the Beis Yosef's approach that he's basically saying it's less than that. And we'll see how that plays out in terms of the halacha as to what is the problem with this idea. But those are the kind to understand what kind of an issue we are dealing with. Now, moving forward, the next phase is basically to understand here how we're going to look at the understanding of the mechanics of this issue. So we basically brought the source. But what is the mechanical aspect? How does it work exactly? So to understand that part, we need this one piece also. It's not just, it's more than just theoretical, because we're going to see later on at the end of the shiur that it's used by the poskim of today. If you understand the mechanics of the Schar Shabbos, how you would use it in halacha l'maisa. So we'll actually see this idea in a moment. So this is basically the introduction to the way, a third approach to how we understand Schar Shabbos. So approach number one is the approach of Rashi, which is, it falls into the category of a gzeira mishum mekach u'memkar. The Beis Yosef sees that there's probably no Isser whatsoever, but there's a concept here, shelorotzu chachamim mishum dehavim mechzei leinish k'schar Shabbos. It's got a sort of an element that it's not Shabbosdik. The third approach we're going to see is that from Reb Chaim. Reb Chaim is, we'll see the Gemara first that he discusses, and that's the Gemara in Shabbos. So you have it in front of you, Tana Rabbanan. Lo yaskir adam kelev l'nochru be'erev Shabbos. A person is not allowed to rent his kelim. In other words, let's say I have a lawnmower, right? So I have a lawnmower, and my friend is not Jewish, and he wants to borrow he wants to rent my lawnmower. So the halacha is, we say, Lo yaskir adam kelev l'nochru be'erev Shabbos. However, b'revi u'v'chamishi mutter. It's going to be permissible if you do it on Revi and Chamishi, which is the fourth or the fifth day, on Wednesday or Thursday. Now what's going on? So Rashi interprets this Gemara and says as follows. Rashi says, Lo yaskir adam kelev lasas behen melacha be'erev Shabbos. Why? Denira, because what's the reason? It appears shemaschira lo l'tzarech Shabbos. It looks like you are renting it to him for the purpose of Shabbos, and that is what the prohibition is. Now, Tosfos has the same approach, but he is essentially alluding to a potential other problem that might be here, which is to speak it out first outside, and then we'll go inside in a moment. There is a machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai is of the opinion that when it comes to your lawnmower has to keep Shabbos also. That's called Shvisas Kelim, and according to Beis Shammai, your lawnmower cannot work on Shabbos. According to Beis Hillel, that's not true. Beis Hillel, we don't say that. Comes Tosfos now and he says like this: Lo yaskir, ein lefarish. Don't explain it mishum shvisas kelim. Don't explain. He says don't understand this Gemara that we just said, that the idea is that you cannot do it on Erev Shabbos. You cannot rent on Erev Shabbos, but you can on Wednesday and Thursday. Don't interpret this that we're learning it like Beis Shammai. Dim kein afilu b'reviu v'chamishi nami. In other words, how would that solve the problem? In other words, if the problem is like Beis Shammai, that your lawnmower may not work on Shabbos, how then could you say in the following in the second part of the clause that it's okay to rent it to him on Wednesday or Thursday? if there's an isser of shavisas kelim, your lawnmower cannot work on Shabbos, how do you solve the problem that you can rent it to him on Wednesday, Thursday? So says Tosfos, don't learn it like Beis Shammai, rather learn it like who? Learn it like Beis Hillel. That's what Tosfos is coming to tell us. So Tosfos is not disagreeing with Rashi, he's just filling in the background. He says, don't go into this machlokus between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel and say that this is a machlokus in the Gemara. No, that's the pshat. Now, Reb Chaim...
Make a difference when we're saying renting, because even if you loaned it to him, it would still be working, it would still be yours, right?
Correct. So this is really hamaskir. We're not talking about, when this is specifically talking, we'll see in a moment why it has to be renting. This machlokus between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is regarding on the rental. Okay?
But that's assuming you're making money. But whether you make money or not, it's still working on Shabbos.
Oh, very good. So we'll see that point. In other words, what do you need? We'll see that actually is the beginning of what I'm about to say. Now I'm going to address that. In other words, what is it about this arrangement that makes it, not permissible according to Beis Shammai? Hold that thought for a second. We'll see how that works out. So Reb Chaim brings down here. There's a question that's brought down by both the Rosh and the Ran, and they ask the following question. And this is the beginning of Reb Chaim's piece here. Now, the purpose of this essentially is to get to a punchline, which, as you can see, I've underlined it. The piece itself gets a little bit into a little bit more mechanics. We may or may not need all of that, but the point we're going to need is the outcome of this thought. It starts like this: V'hinei harif hishmit din zeh. The Reb Chaim points out that the Rif never wrote this halacha down. V'tumu alav harash v'haran demash v'tzfir lei de'is the Asya Kevei Shammai. In other words, remember the Rif, the Rosh, they and the Rambam, they were the poskim of the halacha, and basically what the Shulchan Aruch, how it evolved essentially is the Shulchan Aruch took most often 2 out of the 3 of these poskim, and he poskin la halacha. That's different than many of the other Rishonim where you don't have psak halacha. So the question here is, why did the Rif just leave this halacha out completely? What's going on? So the question is, so the way we say it is, because if the Rif learns the sugya that this is like Beis Shammai, and we don't paskin like Beis Shammai, then there's no reason to put this down, to put this in the halacha. That can't be the pshat. Why? Because if you're going to learn this like Beis Shammai, then what problem do you have? Tosfos already asked this question. Tosfos made the point that this cannot be going according to Beis Shammai, because if it goes like Beis Shammai, then what do you do with Wednesday, Thursday? You still have a problem. That's the way so that can't be the way to learn it. So if you look inside, you'll see as follows. So Reb Chaim comes up with this pshat. The Omer Grach Zal the Geder Isur Schar Shabbos Einoi de Osur Laharviach B'Yom Shabbos. So point number 1 in his understanding of Schar Shabbos is, going back to our questions in the introduction, is the problem to make money on Shabbos? Is that Schar Shabbos? Now why is that relevant? Let's say, for example, you hold a bank account, right? And your bank account gives you interest for 30 days or 60 days or 90 days, and it's calculated on a per day basis, and all of these things. You've done nothing. So is the Isser of Schar Shabbos that you are not allowed to actually make money? In other words, on that day you cannot make money. And this has huge implications. For example, whether you have an internet site that's open on Shabbos, whether you have a website, all these different kinds. So is there a prohibition to make money on Shabbos? Simple. Can my assets increase in value on Shabbos? Says Reb Chaim, no, that's not the Isser. You can, go ahead. That's not the Isser. That's an important point. That's point number 1. Ella, what is the catch? But that's only if there's no malacha, even if that malacha is muteres. In other words, if you have a person who watches the parah, which we'll see in a few moments. He says, Haschar chashiva ha'peula ki'oisei melacha. Translation first, by getting paid, you've transformed the activity into work. So this is the punchline. According to Reb Chaim, even if you started off with an activity that has no malacha inside it, But by getting paid for it, that transforms it into now a malacha. So to address your point, this is how he explains the Gemara, this kasha, and he goes into the next 4 lines, which I'm going to briefly just touch on. He says, he explains now why did the Rif leave this out, and this is what he comes. In other words, the way the Rif learns it is you have to have both pieces of it. You have to have, like the Beis Shammai, which is you have the prohibition of the work, but you also need a malacha. And that, you need both components for that. So that's how the Rif would learn this Gemara. But back to the point, Reb Chaim sees it that there's no Isser whatsoever in making money. Now, whether Rashi agrees or disagrees, we really don't know. What we do know is that Rashi says that there's a problem of Mekach Umemkar. But there's a bigger nafkamina between the way Rashi learns the Sugya and the way Reb Chaim learns the Sugya. The nafkamina would be hiring a goy. According to Rashi, what would you say about hiring a goy? Would according to Rashi, would he allow it or would he not allow it? A goy. He would not allow it. Why? Because you've got Mekach Umemkar going. According to Reb Chaim, on the other hand, the problem is what? The problem is doing a malacha. The goy has no problem with doing a malacha. If he's not doing a malacha, it doesn't make a difference. So there's a huge difference in nafkamina between how you're going to learn the sugya. So that's number one. It's not number one. It is number one, and it's the whole point of who is the isser on, the payee, or is it on the makabel, the person who receives it? Again, this is the machlokas that comes out. So the way Rashi would learn it, the problem is on both sides, which means, for example, if you're going to hire a babysitter who is not bat mitzvah yet, right? Or you hire a goy, that would be a potential nafkamina. According to Rashi, that would be a problem for both. But according to the way Reb Chaim learns it, it would be a problem on the makabel. And it turns out, if you look in the Mishnah Brura in Shin Vav, he paskins this way. Now, it doesn't say he paskins like Reb Chaim, but the idea is he paskins that the isser is on the makabel. So again, you have to work out Rashi in this equation here. So far we've laid out the groundwork for what is essentially going to be the fundamentals of what is the Schar Shabbos, what is the Isser, and we've seen that the Isser has some wide range. It ranges from Rashi's, which is Mekach Umemkar, both sides, both the payer and the receiver. We've seen the idea of Beis Yosef, perhaps that there is nothing whatsoever, and we've seen the idea of Reb Chaim that basically with Schar Shabbos we don't have any Isser whatsoever in terms of making money, but if you do a malacha and you're getting paid for it, it transforms that malacha, it transforms it into a malacha, and now you would have the Isser of Schar Shabbos. So at this point in time, now is when we're going to switch over to saying, what are the ways that now we do know, Puk Chazeh, go outside, and I just told you, there are waiters on Shabbos, there are Balei Kriya who get paid. How and what are the mechanics to get around these barriers? So essentially, there are 4 potential heterim. So heter number 1, most people know, it's called havlah. We'll go into the details, the mechanics of how it works, but havlah means if you do something else before Shabbos, then it will be incorporated. What I hope to do in the next few minutes is to show you the potentially the misuses of this havlah heter, and to show what is really the litmus test of the havlah heter and how it's to be used according to the way the poskim laid out. We'll see heter number 2, we'll split it outside, is going to be something called a dvar mitzvah. And we'll see number 3, whether, we may touch upon it a little bit, this idea of matana. In other words, it's a difference than payment. And then the 4th one is the idea that when you transfer, or when you're involved in not so much a service, but rather a goods. For example, the classic case would be, you come to my house, I run a makolet, my makolet is closed, but comes Shabbos, you need whatever, you need some eggs, you come over, and you ask me to open up the makolet, so I go open the makolet for you, and I give you a dozen eggs. Do you owe me for that? We'll see that later on. So that would be the 4th issue that comes up here, when you transfer not services, but when you transfer goods. So let's deal with number 1 first. So number 1 is basically, it's a Gemara in Bava Metzia, and the Mishnah tells us as follows: Hasoicher es hapoyel. A person he hires a worker. Lishmor es hapara. I will translate it now, just very simply. Hapara, the cow. Lishmor es hatinik, to watch the child. Lishmor es azroim, to watch the garden. Einos in los schar Shabbos, you're not allowed to give the person schar Shabbos. Lefikach ein achrayis Shabbos alav. You don't pay him for the Shabbos, and therefore the achrayis of Shabbos is not on him. Hoya schir Shabbos, schir chodesh, schir shana, schir shavua, nois in los schar Shabbos, lefikach achrayis Shabbos alav. But if you pay him for a week, a month, that is your classic havla. So, for example, without going any further, that's the simplest way to hire a rabbi. That is the simplest way to hire a chazan for the year. It's a simple thing. They work all year round. There's no problem. We'll see a little bit in how this idea works in terms of what it is. But those are the simple approaches. So there are people that work all the time on Shabbos, and for that, there's really, this is basically it's a straightforward Gemara. Now, the Rishonim, there's the Ran, and I think I put down Tosfos, literally say the same thing. So I think I just put down Tosfos. This Tosfos is important because it is the litmus test for Havla. For example, a person is going to come to work for you on Shabbos, so you say, okay, you come before Shabbos, turn on the lights, and we've taken care of it, right? And that can't be further from the truth. That is such a misrepresentation of what Havla is all about. It borders, no, it doesn't border. It is harama. It's actually just it's a sham. That's not harama. How do you know if your deal stands up to the test of Havla? That's the question. So how are you going to know? So this Tosfos tells you what is ultimately the test and whether you've stood up to it or not. Says Tosfos like this. Shabbos. So Tosfos says like this. Now this Tosfos, if you realize, is going back to the Gemara that we talked about before at the Moredes. So Tosfos asks, hold on a second. Don't I have a simple question. Back to the Gemara of the Moredes. V'im tomer frek Tosfos v'hoschar Shabbos la'yidei havlo mutter. Hold on a second. We've got the Moredes here, right? So she's withdrawing services for a period of time. So what's the problem? So why don't we just do what? Why don't we just call it Havla? And we'll just, and then if you call it Havla, then in this way here, we said before that we're worried about that it's going to be Mechsek Schar Shabbos, and the man will only, and he's only going to get 16 dinar for the week. Why? Call it Schar Shabbos. Call it Havla. That's Tosfos' question. So his answer to the question on the Gemara in Ksubas is of course answering the question in the Gemara in Ksubas, but it's a much broader understanding of what Havla is all about. And it's like the Yisod. He says like this. He says, if you go down to the next line, V'yesh Lomar answers Tosfos. V'yesh Lomar. Dehacha aser mishum deloy havi k'ma Havla. There the Gemara he's saying, Tosfos is saying, by the Gemara in Ksubas, by the Moredes, there is no Havla. In other words, you're only getting for every day that the woman is going that there's going to be a case of mored or a moredes, right? That's all you're getting for. Why? And Tosfos says, so let's say they make up today or tomorrow. So what's going to be then if they make up? Then or be'emtza shavua ein mitzarfin kol yimei hashvua zeh. In other words, let's say they make up 10 days into this. So how much do you pay then? Well, then you would pay 10 days. What's the Havla? Now, if I hire somebody and I say, you know what, I'm going to hire you $1 a day, whatever the case is, $5 a day, whatever the issue is going to be. How many days? 10 days. You're going to work over the period of 10 days and Shabbos. Oh, so that's called Havla. Says Tosfos, that's not Havla. Havla doesn't mean you charge. Once you're getting into the per diem charges, your Havla goes out the window. Havla cannot be per diem, which means, let's put this into a practical question. You hire a babysitter for the purpose of Shabbos, so then you hire her, so you say, you know what, I know how to do this, so I'm not going to do the heter turning on the lights on Friday, because that's ridiculous, that's a sham. Fine. I'm going to hire you on Tuesday and Shabbos. You're going to come to my house twice for the week, okay? What happens is now is as follows. I'm going to pay you a lump sum of $20 for both of those activities. Not $10 for this activity and $10 for that activity. You can't do that. You can't put a per diem. Now, again, she says, I charge this and this and this amount, but you have to do it. What is the litmus test? The litmus test is if, let's say, she can't come on Shabbos, or she can't come on Tuesday, then how much do you owe her? $20. That's Havlah. That is the correct Havlah. Havlah basically says, I'm wrapping up on a total amount. Yes, there's a Shabbos in between, but I'm not paying you for the per diem. I'm giving you a unit price. And where this comes up as a problem, says the Magen Avraham, we'll see it on the next page, is when you rent a house or an apartment, right? So let's say, for example, you're going to rent an apartment, and you rent it for 10 days. So the guy says to you, fine, you know what, I'll charge you $200 a night. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That includes Shabbos. Okay, that's how much you're going to pay me. 200 times 10 is $2,000. Is that a Havlah problem? You bet that's a Havlah problem. That you didn't get around that. You've got to construct the deal in such a way where either some of these things have to happen. Where, let's say, the guy says, you know what, at any point in time, let's say I decide I am not staying on. If you have that proviso, then he is responsible for the full amount. That shows, right? So let's just turn to the next page, the Magen Avraham, just to see his case, to see how he learns it. Well, we'll do one thing at a time. The Shulchan Aruch is the next source. The Shulchan Aruch basically quotes this halacha verbatim, so we don't have to worry about that. He tells us that's the heter.
The girl that you hired on Tuesday and Saturday, and as a package deal, and you're going to pay $20 for that, and she worked for you on Tuesday and then fell sick on Friday and said, "Oh, sorry, I can't come over on Saturday."
Right.
You still have to pay her the $20.
So the chayra that you'd have to pay the $20. The Mishnah Brura declares over there. He says, is there a way if a person doesn't come for you, can you afterwards maybe not have to pay the person? And he actually says at the end you can maybe work out the deduction. But in terms of a principle, you're both on the hook both ways. Yes, that's the Mishnah Brura's. He gives a heter that let's say a guy doesn't show up to work. Do I still have to pay him? But the concept is there. But if you look at the next page, the Magen Avraham speaks it out much more clearly in terms of an arrangement with a house rental. So he says, "V'hu adin, he rents a house to a room to his friend. V'nirali v'hu adin hamalvin b'ribis. This is also affecting people. The ribis tzrichim lahalos be'inyan she'im yipara be'emtza shavua." Yipara mikol hashavua kulo. So let's say, for example, you this was for a goy. This is a case where you give money and you tell the goy, okay, so we'll do a deal like this. After 2 weeks, you'll give me 10% or 8%, whatever you work out. He comes into some money beforehand, and he says, okay, I want to pay. I want to bail out. What do? Says the Magen Avraham, you have one of two choices. You either charge him for 2 weeks or you charge him for 1 week. But you can't charge him for the 10 days. That's what Havlah says. The din of Havlah basically says it's a unit, it's a package. So to see it inside, he says, he says to him like this, B'emsa shavua yipara mikol hashavua kula, olo yipara klal, or don't pay at all. He says, Gabi, More de Kansu, it goes through our Gemara. The point being is that is true Havlah. So everyone that says, Havlah, you have to really understand. Now, why is this important? I'll tell you la halacha, because this is heter number 1. So, and this is an interesting idea that I saw in the Aruch Shabbos. He says like this: Chazanim get paid, let's say, for the Yom Neroim, right? So Rosh Shlomo Zalman writes. He says, don't tell the Chazan to daven mincha Erev Shabbos, Erev Rosh Hashanah. That's not Havlah, right? That's not considered Havlah. By the way, he says that might be the source why Chazanim did daven Slichas night, right? That's out there, right? In terms of what it is. But this idea of doing Havlah, that the example we used before about turning on the light or something like that, that's exactly what he's saying when it comes to, you're hiring a chazan for X amount of dollars for the services of Yom Neroim. Don't say that he's going to daven mincha erev Yom Tov, and that's your Havlah. In other words, Havlah has to be a real Havlah. So is a Slichas night considered Havlah? Perhaps. That's what some of the poskim would say. We'll see the Chazanim in more detail right now as we come to that. But the idea of havla. So heter number 1 is havla. Heter number 2. Heter number 2, basically, we said, is going to be this idea of Devar Mitzvah. Now, the Devar Mitzvah is a very interesting phenomenon. So if you look in the Torah takes us back to a very interesting history of the idea of hiring a Baal Tokeya. And the Torah is writing, and he says, Mistabra, I'm reading the Torah now, Shim Shliach Tibra Yodea Litkar Hershus Biyodek. If the Baal Tefillah knows how to blow shofar, go ahead. Elominig Arishanim Shehayu, Zerizin B'mitzvahs, Umechavin Oson Kol Echad V'Echad Notel Chelko Telekabel Schar. He says like this: V'chein Kosav Achi HaRabbi Yechiel. Rabbi Yechiel came from Paris. Rabbi Yechiel mi Paris. V'chein Oid Minig B'Mashkana Shegedoyle V'Ha'ir Makdim Litkoya Kol Mi Shezori's Boy. That was the minig. The people went and blew. Seems like there was an interest in blowing. Masha'ein came B'Sfarad. When it comes to in the Sephardic world, he says sheborchim min hamitzvah. They ran away from this mitzvah. He says ad shetzrichim liskor echad min hashuk. They had to go out and hire somebody for whatever reason. They didn't blow. They didn't have the minig. They didn't have the whatever the training, whatever the desire. Anyways, and listen to what the Torah says. V'lo yodati me'ayin matzu heter zeh. Where do they get this heter to go and get a yankel off the street? Or this was in Sfarad, it was a Habib off the street. And where did they get him from? What's the heter? He says, I don't know the heter. He continues. He goes, She'asr kedetanya aserchatz apol lishmor tatenek, right? It says, Meferish, you're not allowed to do it. She'asr litol schar Shabbos elo al yedei havla. So the Torah is bothered by it. The Torah says, what's this meaning that people hire a Baal Tokeya? Right? He doesn't understand it. Comes the Beis Yosef and he explains this Torah. So the Beis Yosef says in Tov Kuf Pei Hey, he says the opening words are V'lo yadati, the Dibra Maschils V'lo yadati me'ayin matzu lahem heter zeh. He says he kinira lisha usher. He's quoting here from the Torah. Remember, the Beis Yosef wrote his parish on the Torah. He says, I'll tell you where this comes from. It comes from the Mordechai. Mordechai Kosev is so perik. He's Afal Pi. It's the end of Afal Pi. Ahote Komar Hosam Mechse Kischar Shabbos. It appears like Schar Shabbos. That is the Mordechai. Now, Mikan Pasek Harav Baruch Yesh Lichshash Al Hachazanim Shesochrim Asam Lispalel B'Shabbos. So now he says that's the reason. Well, this is the problem. He knows where does this source come from? Where is this idea that this idea? So we're looking now. Remember, we're looking here for a source for a heter because the Torah said, I don't know where you got this from. So the Beis Yosef brings down, he says, the Mordechai gives us round 1, version 1, Rabbeinu Baruch, who says, it's Aser. Comes Rabbeinu Shmuel, who is his son, he says, the Ein Os Isser Ha De Ha Noistin Schar Lekayim HaMitzvahs Lehispalel Ad Kan L'Shoinoi. So where is this the heter? Heter number 2 is, it's a Devar Mitzvah. What is that quoted from? It's in the Mordechai. It's in it's specifically Rabbeinu Shmuel. So that's where it comes from. It's an early on. It's at the level of the Rishonim. It is early on in our tradition that the idea was to pay on what basis? On the basis of the fact that it is a mitzvah. Comes the Beis Yosef and says, hold on a minute. I don't understand this at all. Okay, I don't buy this so quick. He says as follows. The Yeshi Shmuel or Rabbeinu Shmuel. We have to ask on Rabbeinu Shmuel. The Atu, we have to say, Kedei lekayim a mitzvah nechal Shabbos? Very nice. Okay. We've agreed that it's some form of Chilul Shabbos in this proposition. Remember, the Beis Yosef, who I quoted earlier, right? This is the same Beis Yosef and the same Simon, right? He's saying, what do you mean? We're working with the premise that it's Schar Shabbos is going to be an Isser. And just because it's a mitzvah, so does that mean what? That on my way to shul, I'm allowed to drive my car? I didn't have challah. I can bake on Shabbos. How far do you take this? So Beis Yosef says, I never saw that. I never saw this idea that because of thing. V'chein mashma, he says over here, perik mishum shenagu. He says, Tana Rabbanon arba prutos ein bohem siman bracha. There are 4 prutas that people earn that you are not going to see what's called siman bracha, la'olam, forever. V'chad minayu, one of the 4 is schar miturgaman. Right? That's going to be the schar of a meturgaman, someone who translates. Umefaresh, and we explain there, taima mishum demechsek schar Shabbos. going to be a schar Shabbos. But hold on. Vim Isa, if you're going to tell me to have ishum tzad iser bedavar, lo yhava leila meimar ein bohen simin bracha. So the Beis Yosef is now scratching his head. He's saying, one second. We're working with the assumption that it's going to be usher. Okay, if it's going to be usher, then how do you get out of it by saying it's a dvar mitzvah? But if you're going to say it's a dvar mitzvah, he goes now the other way. He says, there's a Gemara that tells us that the 4 prutas that people earn, you're not going to see siman bracha, which means you're going to earn the money, but it's not a good thing. Now you see this idea, I don't know the 4 offhand, but I do recall that, for example, working on Tisha B'Av has this same siman, eina roa siman bracha. You're allowed to work, but it's got that spook factor that says, einoi roe siman bracha. Go ahead and work, but, it's mutter, thing. Now, says the Beis Yosef, if it's eina roa siman bracha, what does that mean in terms of the isser? Can I work, or is it allowed or is it not allowed? If you're going to say that the problem is siman bracha, would you say that it's usr or would you say that it's mutter?
Mutter, but frowned upon.
Of course, it has to be mutter. It can't be usr, because if it was usr, you would just say it's usr. So here what we're saying, no. That means that it must be that it's going to be mutter. Oh, but we don't want you to do it because of what? Because we're going to say it's eina roa siman bracha. Very nice. So if that's the case, says the Beis Yosef, ein b'am sira the mashma, the less behu isura. There is no isur. Remember what we said before? The Beis Yosef, go back all the way to the first page. Beis Yosef learned this and he said, the Gzeira of Shabbos is what? Have a Gzeira elovadai the less behu isura. Right? The Beis Yosef is maintaining his position. He's saying there's no isur. There can't be an isur. Why can't there be an isser? Because you're punishing the guy already for saying, if you're going to earn the money for dvar mitzvah, eina roa siman bracha. That means what are you telling me? It's really mutter. But because of what it is, I don't want you to get, you're not going to see siman bracha from that. Anyway, so he continues the Beis Yosef here, and he says, "V'od demashma shahaya darkom niskar meturgamin b'Shabbos v'yom tovim lahashmiya hadrasha l'Rabbim." They would hire the translator, could deparish the kiven shein socher Shabbos v'atzma elo me'erev Shabbos. Of course, it had to be done from erev Shabbos. Socher oso she'ein yisur b'dover elo sheyesh lachush lechatchila heichodech shu b'makom mitzvah lo chashu klal v'zehu das Rabbeinu Shmuel. So he's answering the question of the Torah. The Torah says, where did you get this from? How did you hire Chazanim and how did you hire Baal Tokeya? He says, where did this idea come from? So Beis Yosef comes to the rescue. He says, they got it from Rabbeinu Shmuel. So much so that there isn't even an Isser. What's the problem? You're not going to see Siman Bracha. Comes the Shulchan Aruch in 2 places and he's going to pass in the halacha for us. Remember, the Beis Yosef and the Shulchan Aruch are the same people. So the Beis Yosef, the Shulchan Aruch then writes, he says, in Shabbos, Hilchas Shabbos, he writes, Asur liskor chazanim lispal b'Shabbos. Says also, V'yesh mi shematir. But there is in a second opinion there's matir. So Simi will tell us that when the Mechaber has a machloket and he says, Stam v'yesh, halacha is kistam. So when the Mechaber writes his, and that's a principle pretty much through most of Shulchan Aruch, which is if the Mechaber brings down 2 opinions, you always, and one is in the form of a stam, and then he says it as a yesh, stam v'yesh, halacha kistam. So here we have the 2. Also, this kar chazanim mispal shab v'yesh misha matir. So how do you go? If you're a Sephardi, you would follow the rule of stam v'yesh halacha kistam. Now he tells you v'im sofer l'shana l'chadish l'kuli al mashari. Of course, if you have the heter of the havlah.
That's the Ramah.
No. Oh, sorry. Yes, that's the Ramah. Correct.
We should stop
Next.
the shear right here.
What?
For our shul's purposes, we should stop the shear right here. Just kidding.
Okay, I mean, so what's that? Stam v'yesh halacha stam, and what? You're not allowed to. There's a big but, and here it comes. Now, in the halacha, by the way, that was for Shabbos. What's the halacha for the Yom Noraim? Right? Because that's in Hilchas Shabbos. So when it comes to this, it says over here, now granted, he's talking about Tkiyah Shofar, or Kedei Lispalel, or to daven, or Letargim b'Shabbos v'Yom Tov. What does he say now? Eina roa me'oso schar simin bracha. What is he paskening like now?
The other way.
He's passing like the other way. He's saying now he's passing like the Yesh Matirim. He's not passing like the Stam. And what does he say? Okay, good. You want to do it? Do it. But you ain't going to see any Siman Bracha from this.
Wait.
Right? Okay. So that's where the Shulchan Aruch lies. Okay. So far we're using heter number 2. Heter number 2 is which one? The Dvar Mitzvah. So if you're going to say the Dvar Mitzvah, then the problem, the caveat with the heter of Dvar Mitzvah is Eino Roe Siman Bracha. How do we paskin? Let's see the poskim of today, and then we'll go from there. So the poskim of today, we'll go to the Mishnah Brura. The Mishnah Brura says V'yesh Shematir. Right, this is going on the Hilchos Shabbos halacha, right, where we brought down the 2 halachas. V'yesh Mishematir, the second one. Sviralei de b'mokem mitzvah loigoz rabbanon al schar Shabbos bazeh. Right? They said, okay, v'yesh mishematir. In the Mechaber, he never told us about in Hilchos Shabbos that it would be Eino Roe Siman Bracha. It's only in Hilchos Yom Tov that he tells us that by Hilchos Rosh Hashanah. So you might have thought, okay, there is a machlokas between, there's no machlokas. Here's how you look at it. In the halachas of Yom Tov, in Rosh Hashanah, he brought the first opinion and said what? That it's usr. The second opinion says the yesh misha matir. Says the Mishnah Berurah, don't think for a moment that this means heter. He says, the Mishnah Berurah, by the way, if you're going to read it carefully, it's going to say, yes, the Mokum Mitzvah goes Rabban Schar Shabbos, Umikol Makom, Eino Roe Siman Bracha, Ubechol Zeh Hu Adin Liskor Tokea. Fine. Continues. Umikol Makom also Liskor Achazan Oy Tehat Tokea Shabbos beyond. You can't hire him on Shabbos. You have to do the deal before. What about Lishana or Lishvua? So that's obvious. That goes back to Havlah. Pirish Sheyispal Gam Bimos Achol. Umishalan Lo L'Chol. So that's your typical, working in a shul. They lane during the week. They daven during the week. They make sure that Sefer Torah is rolled up. There's lots of work to be done. It's not a problem. And that's the way we're going to go. V'ayin b'achroim shekosru shenoagim lahakel l'skor Shabbos l'chud v'hachoshesh l'dvar ha'osrin lo yiktzov b'tchilo ma shelokech haka yesh lomer shehu derech matana. So the Mishnah Berurah now introduces us to the third potential heter, which is a matana. Now, for those of you that come to shul on Shabbos and go to the main shul, does the rabbi give the boy, the bar mitzvah boy, a redundancy of words, his bar mitzvah present?
To avoid a kinyan on Shabbos.
So what does he do?
It says, is this put away for you for after Shabbos?
Oh, come before Shabbos, we put away, we did that. In other words, what? The halacha is we don't give a matana on Shabbos. And it's a very interesting question that comes up.
That's al-kinyan. That's a different thing. Completely.
Correct. It's al-kinyan. We don't give, right? So that's because it's going to be on Shabbos, right? So that's good. So that's on Shabbos. So what about giving a matana for after Shabbos? So that heter does exist. For example,
leaves the sparring there, and you pick him up afterwards.
Okay, that's going to be fine.
Take it in his hand.
So that's going to be, as Simi pointed out, that gets you the kinyan. This introduces the concept of matana. But what about if a guy comes up and he says, I'm going to lane for you. After Shabbos, you say, you know what? That was a great job. Here's $50. What's the problem? What's the issue with that? So the issue with that is that there is no issue with that. That kind of an arrangement can be made as long as there has not been a discussion, there hasn't been any negotiation. It's not allowed to do that on Shabbos. You want to negotiate afterwards. You want to give him a token of your appreciation. So this matana is an important one for the babysitter. But if the babysitter comes and says, I earn $8 an hour, right, then that's going to be a problem, right? That's where, let's say, for example, you don't discuss a price, and then she comes and you babysit, and the understanding is she's a nice kid, she's terrific, she's going to do you a favor. After Shabbos, you want to give her a little bit of something. That's where this idea comes from the Mishnah Berurah. But to hire a babysitter on Shabbos alone, you have to go through the exercise of, does it meet the criteria number 1 of heter number 1? Havlah. No. Yes or no? No. Heter number 2. Is it a dvar mitzvah? So let's say you say, okay, you know what? She's coming so that I can go to shul. Very nice. It's a dvar mitzvah. So by the way, when you give the kid the money, you say, by the way, you ain't going to see any siman bracha. So, okay, that's very nice. That's a terrific way to give the kid, somebody some money, right? You hire a waiter on Shabbos, and you say, okay, good, sure, we'll take. You work at HASC, you work at this you work at this camp or that camp. It's okay. We'll pay you. Ein Roisim and bracha. So the heter of Dvar Mitzvah leaves one with a feeling of, okay, so the best heter, of course, is going to be Havlah, without a doubt. I want to speak out the fourth heter, and then I want to just go practical in the last few minutes, and just to see what some of the poskim write about actual halacha l'maisa on several of these issues. So we spoke out, heter number 1 is the idea of Havlah. Heter number 2 is Dvar Mitzvah. Heter number 3 would be a matana. Heter number 4 is the following. It's a question that's brought down in the Shutim of the Noid of Yehuda. He says like this: a woman needs to go to the mikvah on Friday night. She goes to the mikvah on Friday night, and the fellow who runs the mikvah, he, in those days they had firewood. That's how they heated up the water. And she goes to the mikvah. Can he charge for the services of the use of the mikvah? So what do you think?
He's a goy or a Jew?
Jew. He's a Jew. He's a Jew. The woman has to go to the mikvah. He says there's a charge for using the mikvah. You know, like it says here. Okay, that's what they did in Europe, right?
But he doesn't make a fire. How does he make a fire on Shabbos?
The fire was existing already.
It costs him nothing.
Does it? That's not what the Noid of Yehuda says. The Noid of Yehuda says the exact opposite. The Noid of Yehuda says because his firewood costs him money, at the end of the day, it's a log. What do you mean cost him nothing? He had to pay for the wood.
But it's already burning on Shabbos. I mean on Friday.
Because he's keeping it open for the services of women who need it in the community, right? In other words, it's his cost. The cost of running this mikvah is the fact that there's going to be a cost. He's got to put in firewood. He's going to put towels and things like that. And this introduces us to the concept that we said before, which is when you transfer goods, that you not only can you pay, you must pay. In other words, if let's say, like the example I used before, I own a makolet. You come to my house knocking on the door on Shabbos. You need a dozen eggs. Of course, you can have a dozen eggs. You take the dozen eggs with you. And not you should pay me back after Shabbos, but rather you owe me a dozen eggs, you owe me money, right? So when it comes to transferring a goods, right, not services, there you absolutely. Now this heter is very, very important because let's say, for example, you own a hotel, right? You own a kosher hotel. You run a hotel. So the heter for otherwise, how would a person, with hiring Shabbos? So either you say, oh, I use the hotel on Erev Shabbos a little bit so I get Havlah. Again, no nudge, nudge, wink, wink on this one. Don't check in at 4:44, 10 minutes before Shabbos and say you got to use the hotel on Friday. If you came and you used the pool, the whirlpool, and you got a massage, that's one thing. But there is cost in maintaining a hotel. So all the poskim say that is perfectly permissible to check into a kosher hotel, to a facility that's run by Jews, and paying that amount. There's no schar Shabbos because what's being transferred here is there's goods that are involved. There's maintenance. In fact, in the Aruch HaShabbos he brings down, if let's say for example you have a zoo that is owned by a Jew, can you buy a ticket before Shabbos, right, and go to the zoo? He says, of course you could, because running of the zoo has maintenance. There has all kinds of different other costs things. So that's what you're paying for. So that is an important approach. Now, does that approach help the babysitter? Does that approach help the chazan? Not really. So we have the four heterim. So in the last 5 minutes, I just want to run through the psak of the various poskim with regards to the chazan, the physician. Any of these kinds of work. So what's easy is we've already determined the rabbi, the chazan, who is for the whole year. Those are easy; they fall under havlah. Dvar mitzvah is not where you want to be going. So, for example, if let's say a rav is invited for a scholar in residence, right, and he doesn't need to. He's got prepared, speeches, and he's got all prepared, things. The question is for schar Shabbos, how do you get around that? Havlah? What's the havlah? It's coming in just for Shabbos, right?
You could make a speak on Motzei Shabbos or something.
You can, as long as you can pass. As long as you can pass the litmus test, right? That's what you have to. At the end of the day, your havlah has to be true and not a haram. If the Saturday night is going to be a good draw and there's going to be a reasonable thing, then you've worked it out in that way. Dvar mitzvah, absolutely, but you're telling the person, by the way, Eina roeh siman bracha. That's the catch of Dvar mitzvah. So we talked about this, for example, a moil. So, what does the moil do, right? So, havla, probably not much havla that he can do, right? The idea would be a dvar mitzvah. So that's the problem. Is that's not a wonderful heter to have. So the question is, what other heterim do you have? So there's other heterim that exist, which is, for example, called schar b'teila. So when it comes to schar b'teila, it means that when I work on Shabbos, I could have been doing something else during the week. So the Bal Koreh will use prep time. So, for example, you don't pay him for the Shabbos performance, you pay him for the fact that he took hours to prepare that week, which I've always said is the litmus test. You should not pay a Bal Koreh who does not do a good job. Because if you pay a Bal Koreh who does not do a good job on Shabbos, it comes out that you might be paying him schar Shabbos, because he can't say schar b'teila. Because had he been a schar b'teila, he would have done a good job. So that's an important point, right?
So where's the schar b'teila for a moil?
So schar b'teila for a moil is like this.
That's cool.
So then there's this idea of the work that you did, which is and how far you can go. So for example, professional. It applies, let's say, for example, a nurse, a physician, a moil. In other words, for all the work experience that has been done, you're not paying him for the 1 minute slice. What you're paying him for is all the years of training that they have done. Now that you're obviously you're
Isn't that more of an appearance fee?
That's
So-
such an old joke, it's like,
you mean like showing up,
Yeah.
right? So again, I don't know. Like it's much easier to fall into the category of havla. It's much easier to say, well, if you're going to have schar Shabbos, ein rosim and bracha, once you get into schar b'teila, so you're a rebbe, right? So let's say, for example, a guy hires you, any of us, right? He says, can you learn with my kid bar mitzvah, Shabbos afternoon? So you say, sure. An hour before mincha, come to shul and you work it out. The problem is, what are you paying for there? Like, I mean, so there's schar b'teila that I could have been doing something else, right? On the week, it's for my expertise. So those are a little bit more tricky to be able to work out. The moil for the minute, I mean, it's the experience, it's all those other things. I think it's more than the appearance, right?
With respect to the Yom Roim, aren't there poskim who say that it's in fact proper to hire a chazan for the Yom Roim? Because the chazan then will take his job more seriously, and the people will take
correct.
the chazan more seriously.
So look at this. If you look at the Aruch HaShulchan, he first goes through, because we're just going to run out of the time, I want to just conclude. Basically, he has a whole shtickle here about the chazan. At first, he starts saying, well, I'm not sure where this heter comes from. At the end, he gives a couple of reasons why. If you look at the last two lines, the gam lechazanim ha'ovrim mishav mechosh mishzel la'onik shabbos v'amos notim derech nedabel apikoch ein iser bilvad kenaliyah z'lazer l'lametz chus. The Aruch HaShulchan, his tone is one of I'm giving l'lametz chus. The idea is, you could see like for years the idea has always been it has nothing to this is long standing the issue that chazanim were paid at some point throughout history. That seems like it was never an issue. Question is, where do they find the heter? So if you have a heter havla, then you have no problems whatsoever. For the guest appearance, for the cameo appearance chazan that comes in, he'll daven slichas night. If you still don't have an option, then you can easily say, no chazan gets up for the Yom Roim, even experienced chazanim, without really doing due diligence prior to Yom Tov. Right? I think I could say that on behalf of many people, and there is the schar b'teila for that. Right? That is again a very straightforward approach to the schar b'teila. You want that? Most people cannot. And in fact, the Aruch HaShulchan differentiates between a Shabbos where he says anybody can go up, and Yom Roim where not anybody else can go up. There is that idea, so that is going to be schar b'teila. The last point is the physician. We can't leave the physician out of this discussion. So the Mishnah Brura writes, "Umiyaledes bevadei muteres likas schar Shabbos." So the Mishnah Brura says that a miyaledes, and of course by extension we would say a physician, is going to be permissible to take schar Shabbos. Now, what does the Mishnah Berurah mean by that? Siman Eina Ro Siman Bracha also? So sorry? Oh, so he says, so the Mishnah Berurah is based on the Tshuvas of the Mari Bruna, and the Mari Bruna writes basically the idea that we have a concept of Pikuach Nefesh, which means that the physician, is not in the category of Eina Ro Siman Bracha, but really, again, because of this idea of Pikuach Nefesh, it's a different status, and there's actually a complete heter for that. There is a heter in terms of being able to do it. He says Dilma, for example, in the Mari Bruna, he says you want your physicians and your midwives and your nurses to be engaged. He says Dilma iyada de lo leisev lo schar lo yasye. If they would know that they're not going to get paid, you're not sure that they're going to exactly move, for you. So better that we keep everybody omis atzelas b'mitzvah. She's going to become very, very lackadaisical. So he says basically that's the heter there. The Shmira Shabbos kehilchasa, which is psak halacha, rofe or achot shenikraim lahanik tipul refuei b'Shabbos. So a physician or a nurse that is called to do the work of Shabbos, mutar lahem lidros schar al Lazer harofim, and he says avolaso davra zebeshchar. He paskins halacha lemaisa, yes, that they can get paid, and doesn't seem to have the caveat of eino roa siman bracha.
Based on what?
Pikuach nefesh from the Mari.
But Pikuach nefesh says you have a chiyuv to do it because it's Pikuach nefesh.
Right.
It doesn't mean that you have to get paid for it.
Correct. So the question becomes, and he says, you're going to become lazy. In other words, the idea is, go call the next guy. Rav Moshe used this heter, for example, for the Bnei Hatzalah. The Bnei Hatzalah, for example, who are in New York and they get called out Shabbos afternoon, can they come back after they go out to a Hatzalah call? Right? So they get called away from their family, and now they end up 25 blocks down the street because they went there by camp, they got the thing. Can they come back or not? Says Rav Moshe, absolutely they can come back. It's based on a Gemara in Sukkah and Rosh Hashanah also, that the idea is basically that hitira lahem sofan mishum tchilasan mishum sofan. In other words, if you're not going to let people do these things, then who says the next Shabbos the guy's going to want to volunteer? You know what? You carry the pager. I don't need it anymore. That's the heter for the Hatzalah, which again.
So by that rationale, husband who accompanies his pregnant wife to the hospital.
Exactly, I was about to say that. So that he cannot say that because he will go next week or the year later if it becomes a year, right? In other words, the husband going with the wife does not have that heter to go back. If he goes to the hospital with her by cab, he cannot come back, right? And it's a big difference also. For example, let's say this is halacha l'mais, we're getting off topic, but for example, if you have a resident who is working a night shift, right? He works and he has to do a night shift Friday night. Can he come home by car? The answer is no, because he's in a contract, he's engaged. He doesn't have an option to say, if next time you do it, if you're already finished and you're at home and someone calls you up from the cholent, you know what? You say, you know what? I'm not going out because next week it's so you know what? I'm not joining this rotation. I don't want to be part of this. But if you're working, you're on staff, it's a different story altogether. Now, that person, by the way, doesn't have a problem with Schar Shabbos because his salary for the whole year is covered. So he doesn't have a Schar Shabbos problem. We got off topic there. I want to say one last piece, just halacha l'maisa, based on the Reb Chaim about the Chazan. What did we say about the Reb Chaim? Goes back a little while ago. We said, Reb Chaim said that if you have a babysitter, it wasn't a babysitter, he said if you have a malacha, you have a non-malacha, but you get paid for it, it becomes a malacha. Right? So the babysitter, once she gets paid, she now is doing the malacha. So according to this, listen to this. This is brilliant. Shlomo Zalman says this. He says like this. He goes, but however, when it comes to the chazan who is davening, you would never say that the chazan's davening, even if he's going to get paid for it, gets transformed into a malacha. So this is
a dvar mitzvah.
It's a dvar mitzvah, right? So in other words, it's a dvar mitzvah. And even though now he's getting paid for it, theoretically, Reb Chaim said before, it becomes now malacha, and it would fall into the getter Schar Shabbos. Reb Shlomo Zalman said that he heard this from his father, who heard it from Reb Chaim directly, and it's quoted in the Aruch HaShabbos, and it says that a tefillah never becomes a malacha. And because of that, Reb Chaim would give a heter as well. Reb Chaim gave a heter for chazanim to be able to earn money without the caveat of Eina Roa Siman Bracha. So the truth is, to sum up, we have multiple heterim to have. You have to just be, I think, realistic. You have to be honest. There can't be harama. Havla is not a blanket heter to say whatever you want to do. It has to fall. It has to meet the litmus test. Devar mitzvah has a lot of caveats to it, which might be ein hara siman bracha. There's more of a heter for example, we saw for chazanim because of this idea of Reb Chaim. We saw nurses, physicians. We also saw that maybe, let's say, someone who learns Bal Korei, Dvar Mitzvah. Dvar Mitzvah alone might not be able to get you very far, but if you have Schar B'Teila, you can have that as well. And finally, you can pay for a matana. And finally, the last one was the idea that you have to pay for for any of the goods you use on Shabbos. That it doesn't fall into the category of Schar Shabbos.
Right.